Chapter 5 Birth of the Supreme Witness. Out there beyond the great plateau of the savannah and the translucent-tipped mountain tops of southern Mozambique, just across a narrow stretch of the Dragon Pond Sea, was the Anian Islands. The Anian Islands, home to the mythic warrior cult, the Snake Riders. Covered on its flanking sides by the fire desert where dragons went to die and on the other by the night forest. Only the most foolish men dared to ride in their direction, and those who did soon regretted it. The first thing was not the eternal, for the indescribable was the origin of the universe. The indescribable was a dream that the Supreme Spirit of all things shared with her creation, so that the wisest all recognized that dreams told us things, ancient truths, and future's portents. The Zamina of the Snake Riders, the princess of the Snake Riders in Yovo tongue, was only 10 when she learned she was immortal. Now she was turning 17 and still had an eternity before her. Long after all her sisters had perished and her mother was no more, she would remain on this earth a wanderer, a supreme witness, doomed to observe the conclusion to humanity's epic story. What was one who had only lived 17 years of their existence meant to make of this charge? The Zamina Nzambi Ngozi was woken up that morning by the Effie Bear's sweet melody. At first she thought the song was part of her dream, but staring up at the grass thatching that made up the roof of her royal hut, she soon realized she had stirred back into existence. She lay there on her bamboo bed and feathered mattress, silent for a moment, fantasizing about grabbing a star from the sky, clutching it and crushing it in her palm. She felt her strength and tremblings of a strange destiny, far away from the Anian Islands she called home. Some of the tribe of Snake Riders considered her spoilt given the excesses of her quarters. Her heart crammed with baubles, dyed silks, jewelry, instruments for her musical training, her paddock with the swiftest horses, and her own personal armory stacked with weapons worthy of a seasoned general. Alabaster carvings of Asante, Oboengwe, Ayami, and Montu the Moon Huntress among other patron goddesses decorated the sacred shrine, under which she'd tucked away hidden maps of foreign lands, pilfered from the war council's quarters. Her mother from as far back as she remembered showered her with bounties, the best training and equipment a young warrior could ask for. But the only thing the young Zamina wanted was the one thing elusive to her, the one thing her mother, and only her mother knew, that the spirit's prophecy made impossible, prohibiting her from giving Nzambi what she truly desired, what she had given so many other warriors of the village, namely her freedom. Freedom to determine her own destiny as the goddesses saw fit. The Effie Bear's song reminded her of her ponderous dream that night. She couldn't quite recall the dream in any sensible sequence, but she remembered an evil white dwarf man killing an innocent baby Effie Bear with a deadly blow from a dragon's stone. She remembered her exhilaration gliding in the sky like her friend Elagbara the giant Eloxbird, clear over the translucent, dragonstone-tipped tops of the mountain sisters. She remembered the confidence with which she soared, before losing control and plummeting to the earth, terror taking over as she began to freefall from a throng of crystal stars. She remembered wielding her favored javelin, Sister Imiai, and her mother's sword Heaven's Curse, in open combat with a demonic army of men with bloody deer antlers and ghostly eyes that glowed in the dark. And she remembered a woman walking in the fire desert towards her as earth dragons flew overhead. She remembered seeing the woman through the sandstorm caused by the flapping wings of the dusty beasts. The grey woman strode naked through the storm with
arrows protruding from head and right eye and left breast, a few lodged in her arms and legs, and others snapped in various cracks and crevices of her body. Yet, she did not bleed, suffer, or agonize. She was at ease with her condition, almost as if they were bones or appendages poking out naturally from her skin. She did not take shelter from the dragons either. Instead, she walked boldly toward Nzambi, finally collapsing on her knees before her, coughing bile, and from the arrow woman's sand-crusted lips flew a plume of locusts. But before Nzambi could make sense of this image, it was replaced by a most treacherous and treasonous scene of her running her mother through with her javelin, murdering her own mother in order to gain freedom. The idea appalled her waking self, but immortal dreams, often our unwanted lusts, are depicted as personal glories. Just then a voice echoed in her head. Nothing forever ever ever. Nzambi. Reborn, reborn, reborn. As something greater. What was it? From whence did this voice arise? The Zamina wondered. Yet, that voice. She recognized it. She recognized it from her dream. Trying to grasp on before the thought disappeared, suddenly she remembered a profound message had been delivered to her that night. But by whom? She did not know. Uncertain of what her dream meant, she tried to piece the images together in her mind, but frustratingly, the more she tried to hold on to them, the more they evaded her. All the vying images congealing until any thread of a meaningful narrative was lost in a senseless collage. The temporary enlightenment she experienced faded away bit by bit, slowly being
replaced by the urgency signaled by the morning horn that blew loud for all the village to hear. The horn meant she was already late to the medicine woman's ceremony that marked the end of her 16th cycle, her ascendancy into womanhood, a time when she would have to select good wives and perform in the tournament that was the sacred trial of every snake rider expected to take seat in high office. Her mother Halima, the High Zami, warrior queen of the Anyan Islands, was eagerly awaiting her daughter in the cave of her most trusted medicine woman Rimu, the wolf woman. She was the high priestess of the island whose prayers to Oboengwe left her possessed with the spirit of the wolf, even granting her the power to turn herself into a demon wolf when she consumed human blood. Nzambi, realizing how disappointed her mother would be, quickly rose like the flames of split faggot. She put on her royal tiara and she crushed siala powder in mortar till it became a greenish paste and used her ceremonial snake scale pattern pencil to apply her tribe's animal print, dotting it on the left side of her cheeks and shoulder. She wore her dyed damask vest and skirt, threw on her weapons, then took off on Vision, her favored white mount, to journey to Rimu's cave. As she rode past the neighboring compounds, she surveyed her expansive domain. An impressive village, fortification of thousands of well-built huts, each capable of housing 30 people and garnished with complementary floral arrangements and fruit trees. In the royal quarters there were 500 larger huts for the Zomis and ranking riders' use, as well as temple huts, dyed in sapphires, scarlets, and golden yellows, each boasting massive snake motif structures or busts of the goddesses' visages instead of roofs. This made the huts look like large bells, with the god's head standing in for the bell handle, and the waist of the bell being the main body of the hut. The most sacred holy place was the black hut, which depicted Oboengwe with her royal headdress and long wig protruding out of it into the entranceway, the striking absence of her eyes haunted, while her thick Mozambian lips, curled into a giddy and alacritas grin, lifted one's spirits. All this beauty surrounded a joyful market square full of singing, dancing, feasting, gossiping, love-making, preaching and philosophizing. Equally ornate with translucent dragonstone statues molded of the goddesses and ancestor spirits. Nzambi had short curly hair with dark skin, big nose and full lips typical of the women of the region. She sported a woman's body with an athletic build. There was something slightly boyish in her comely appearance. Yet, comely she definitely was, and her appearance remained unaltered by the ravages of war like most of the elder snake riders, since she had never seen real combat. In fact, she had never even seen a man, nor had she known death. Even though her body and mind had been pushed to the limits of human endurance, nonetheless her innocent eyes had been sheltered from the world's true depths of obscenity and darkness. It is for this reason that both in appearance and spirit she was less hardened than the majority of her sisters. Bathed in perfumes and honey milk, drinking from chalices made of turtle shells, riding horned horses as swift as jungle cats and as bewitching as rose rabbits. The Zami Halima, for instance, was bald, with a somewhat masculine figure, her bronze skin carved out of 1,000 battle scars. To be sure, one could see that had things turned out different for the Zami, she would have been a handsome woman, as naturally she had a kind face. But endless war with the male tribes had turned that kindness into a permanently tough and willful expression. She was a leader who did not suffer fools. Her name, while vilified by the neighboring male-ruled tribes, was nonetheless feared and respected. She'd earned every bit of that respect, with the terrible toll the revolution for her sister's liberation took on her. Every blow and stab wound she survived. Every sister she had lost. Every home her nomadic tribe saw razed to the ground. Every man who had betrayed her had left Zami a ruthless military leader and general revered by the women of her tribe. It was the Oba chief, Alebansa Oikon, the Temerian cannibal king, who had forced the snake riders to seclude themselves on the Anyan Islands, away from the violence of men. While in pursuit of her hand, Talebansa had led a campaign of unparalleled psychological terror and physical abuse on the women, who would later join the ranks of the mythic warrior cult, the Snake Riders. According to legend, 5 patron deities of the Snake Riders breathed fire, gold, and iron into Nzambi's infant lungs. Aboyengwe, Ayami, Montu, Adora the goddess of freedom and dreams, and Asante the warrior goddess gifted the babe life. As such, surging through her lungs, coursing through her veins, boiling in her hot-tempered heart was God's blood. As a babe she burst into the world like cannonball fire.
One night, after several cycles marooned on her island paradise, the Zombie Halima chased through the spring shower, deep into the forest of the elders, through the mangrove swamps, through the putrefying vegetation and dark stagnant waters, wading her way through the muck and overflowing rivulets common during the 7th moon, until she arrived at the western coast of the Anyan Islands, on a beach or more small inlet. The beauty of the low tide brought her fatigued body to its knees. She wore her warrior garb that night, ripping off her leather vest, exposing her saggy bosoms as she howled and hollered at the moon. A flood of tears exploded from her eyes as she collapsed, grabbing a handful of sand, tactlessly smearing grains of sand all over her face, into her hairy armpit, scar chest. Finally, she shoved a fistful into her vulva, breathing heavily, whimpering at the stars. Halima was usually a thick-skinned and measured leader, or at least she put on that front while addressing her enemies or her tribe. As commander of over 1 million loyal subjects, she couldn't afford to lose her cool for too long. But tonight her grief had reached the pitch of hysteria. Knees buried in the wet sand, she calmly released her blade from her muddy tie harness and pressed the knife toward her womb. She cried out to the gods, "Asante, where are you now? And you, Aboyengwe, you fucking liar. You watched them rape me. They don't chop off my parts. At night when I lay with Gahiji, I pretend and I moan, but she knows." General Gahiji was the queen's copper-skinned lover with thin features and fine, long, dark hair, who had voyaged on slave boats across the wailing Spirit Sea. The Zombie had liberated the women of her clan from the white man's meat markets and absorbed them into the ranks of the Snake Riders. She pretends as well, but I feel nothing. No pleasure, no pain, no nothing. Have I not suffered enough? She began banging on her chest with one hand, with fearsome pounds. "You're a fucking liar. You're all fucking liars. How much more of this hellish life must I endure, Mama? You said you'd deliver us. Instead you condemn us to paradise. And I fell for it. I am not a woman. They took that from me. Not a man. So, who am I?" She murmured off, eyes red and grimacing, staring helplessly at the half-moon, like a trapped beast, so mad with fury at its current misfortune that it could lash out, savaging the neck of the Samaritan trying to liberate it. 9 moons prior, on that exact night, under the instructions of her favored oracle Rimu, Halima had trudged her way through the opaque forest with ritual offerings for the goddesses, to the very spot where she held the knife to her womb. Lowering herself to the crystal sands, she began to scoop up large sections of dirt and clay, walking until a small recess in the ground had filled with the clear waters of the Dragon Pond Sea. Whilst there she had heeded to Rimu's wisdom and filled her hopeful heart with faith, belief that the trusted goddesses of the island would do right by her as long as she remained a pious and loyal servant. She was dabbling in source magic, so powerful forces were at play, but she trusted in Rimu's protection spell, and in any case, this being her last hope, she was willing to sacrifice anything, even her own life. She had never really feared death, given that she had
fought her first war at the tender age of 11, laying down her life for a dangerous mission was like second nature to the Zombie now.
As night fell, she lit 4 burning torches and placed them in the 4 corners around her trench while she chanted her threnody to the mothers of the island. Mothers of the island, hear this song of life. Hear me dance and sing to your honor. Hear my honorable ancestors weep. Hear their hearts ache. Hear the love song inside my wanting womb. 10 rainy seasons have passed, Mama Ayami, now we age as women do. 10 rainy seasons of peace, war with men folk, now like a distant dream. 10 rainy seasons, we now remain dutiful to our beautiful mamas, and we thank you. Esho, Esho. Yes, thank you, mamas. You reward us, protecting us from the great evils of Abocha and the night forest. 10 rainy seasons since you done help me terminate the bastard boy Alabanza forced into my tummy. Esho, 10 rainy seasons have passed. No war, no violence, no death, no change. Here you keep us safe and give us blessings plenty, plenty. Esho. So what I ask of you? So what I ask? WW what I beg of you, Mama Ayami. Mama Asante. Mama Monto, Mama Adora. Since we are here in a prison cell we dare not escape, she thought, but didn't utter, in fear she might stir up the ire of the gods. However, it began, no one precisely knew, but an unrest had begun to settle over the women of the Anian Islands. A natural yearning had spread like the river Pox throughout the Anian Islands, all the way through to the capital Oran Igan and the marketplaces. And if the fever was not stemmed soon, the sickness was bound to threaten the snake riders' fragile peace. Powerful womanly urgings had returned, the desire growing steadily stronger and stronger with each passing moon and each
passing season. What could quell the aching of their empty wombs? Only the gods themselves could answer. For 10 rainy seasons many the women remained barren. Trapped here in paradise, the pain of the past safely tucked away, removed from sight, left to the realms beyond the dragon-born sea. It is true that the memory hadn't entirely faded, but at a distance all memory of suffering loses its vigor until one day the ordeals of one's past and youth seem remote and even manageable in comparison to the brutal later stages of mortality. One's worst day is always more welcome than the day of one's death, even if reached in relative peace. Then there's one's legacy, what one will leave behind. In the Yovo lands, the Sisterhood of Snakes had been treated dreadfully. And it must have seemed to the snake riders that it was the gods' punishment, spiting them for their refusal to lay with men or their unholy sexual liaisons with one another. For many cycles the gods blessed the very swords of armies who enslaved them, aided them in battle as thousands of their sisters fell fighting for their freedom. Each home they cultivated sacked and sieged, so much so, they imagined even their patron goddesses had abandoned them to their fate. Watching mirthfully as the bodies piled and some of the snake riders' bravest warriors, one by one, were offered up as sacrifices in Mama Montu and Mama Asante's honor. Painful memories, certainly. Traumas that kept a good portion of the women awake at night, constantly vigilant, watching, yet the longing persisted.
Mamas, I humbly supplicate myself to you. Promise to serve you good. I give my blood to the earth, so you may fertilize it with your magic, Mama Ayami. Esho. Mama Montu ward away the evil omens from this child by shining bright this night, so that Asante might see clearly and protect her new daughter. Esho. So she continued with her pious prayers and continued walking on the sand in the recess, which now had been cultivated into a thick doughy substance, dipping her fingers into the flesh of the brown sludge, skillfully manufacturing a small shape out of the magic clay. As the waves broke, interrupting the haunting silence, the zombie's bloody fingers crafted a small humanoid figure with discernible features. Covered in dirt, grime and sweat, her neglected stomach empty and rumbling, she stubbornly persevered until dawn, as first daylight absorbed the dark air, shining down on the recess. Contained within it a perfect replica infant, wrinkles, fingernails, hints of lips and gums, and so forth. Once she was satisfied with the form of the doll, she took out her trusty blade and cut a shallow gash into her hand, pouring the subsequent licking blood on the body of the doll. With infinite care she raised it and ran into the forest with her, threading her way through a trackless solid wall of dark green vegetation until she had arrived at the edge of the night forest, which was marked by the god tree with its luminous spring leaves. There, she placed the child into the hollow of the tree, then began to pray and chant, "We biji of you, Esho. We say spirit no grab him. nor leave them well. Born our Zamina from the earth, born her singing to the ancestor skies, born her singing where with the ancestors be lying, born her dancing and howling at the moon, born her Aboengwe, born her now, Oya, born her now, dancing mamas, Oya.
As she chanted the sacred prayer of her patrons, she witnessed a miracle. Inside the hollow she had placed her in, tiny threads of roots needled their way from all directions towards the child's head's arms and feet until they made contact, pinching and piercing its skin. She watched in awe as the tree leaves themselves began expanding to the size of small, pink rubies, then contracting again, breathing life through its tendrils into the lifeless figurine. As it did, the complex system of glowing veins and capillaries formed within it. The baby's tiny heartbeat, lungs, kidney and brain developed before her eyes, each radiating luminescent beneath her translucent skin, until they shone as pronounced as the divine leaves of the god tree. After some moments watching in wonder, the queen once again fell to her knees, mouth aghast. Before her was a beautiful baby girl, dark as cocoa and thick and chubby as a lion cub. Clay had become flesh. But it was only when she heard the girl wail loud enough to alarm hornbills in the nearby trees that Halima herself burst into joyous tears. Gently she reached into the hollow, untangling the bawling child from the tree's intrusive roots. Gently she comforted the baby, swaying her in her cradling arms. S-H-H-H-H, 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 my love.
S-H-H-H-H, 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 little Zamina. S-H-H-H-H, they born you, my love, they really born you. S-O, my baby. S-O, my love. Halima was a warrior born, and it was in her nature to be a little rough. Even her many lovers in the royal court tried to encourage her to be more steady and gentle with her touch. The bedroom was not a battlefield, after all, Gahigi would tell her, but since she had been snipped so young, she never really knew this elusive panting pleasure she saw so many women experience. Nor so did she comprehend Gahiji's enigmatic pleas to be more tactile or tease her a little, because she was so close. Yet, with her precious Zamina, the moment she held her, she was a natural. She fell in love instantly. Nothing, she thought, could take that away from her. Until she woke up. Stunned, confused. Where am I? She thought, wiping the cobwebs from her eyes. I must have fallen asleep. Where is she? One thought instantly succeeding another. Still laying by the god tree, she recognized her surroundings. It could all still be real. It was now afternoon and the heat of the twin suns had reached a torrid high. She wasn't too far from the god tree, but why wasn't the baby in her arms? No matter. It had to be real. Must have just fallen asleep. I must remember my age now, she said, mused as she approached the god tree. She just knew it was real. But alas, as she inspected the hollow in the god tree, instead of a newborn laying there, there was a deformed clay pyre, baking in the heat, so that some of the figure had even melted, dripping off the wood. A dream, she thought. Impossible. Could this truly have been a trick by Adora? Adora was the youngest sibling of the goddesses of the island, and known to be the most immature. Often she played tricks on her subjects in their dreams, but could she have conjured up a trick so wretched and cruel?
The Zami Halima pilgrimaged back to Rimu's cave to consult her. There, Rimu reassured her that the dream was a good omen, and that the baby was real. The gods were simply testing her faith and resolve.
9 moons and no reply, Halima thought as she plunged her own dagger into her womb. Then she laughed and smiled a sarcastic grin. Nzambi, I know you were real, she muttered to herself as her blood jetted out her tummy in crimson sputters. Just then, she saw it. A luminous figure appeared in the distance, heading towards her, strolling on the sand through a row of milk trees. I'm dead, she figured. The spirits have come for me. That's okay, fine. Almost fading from the loss of blood, Halima hadn't even noticed that a goddess stood before her. She raised her head. Standing there smiling back at Zommy was a naked woman, with the extremely haggish face of an old crone, but a body, youthful and taut, tight and firm in all the right places. And the incongruence didn't stop there. From her hind whipped the tail of a lion, but as it whipped back and forth it periodically changed to a scorpion, then an elephant, and peacock and so on. Though she was brown like the Zommy, with a curly bush so radiant and abundant that it poured from over her shoulders to the beach floor, nonetheless she had big blue refulgent pupils that when one looked deeply enough inside them, swayed like the undulating turquoise waves of the Danarian seas. From beneath her breast, 2 glowing hearts beat, illuminating her chest, decorated with seashell chains, and seashells and flowers weaved into her hair. The Zommy finally recognized her. Ayami, Halima uttered dumbfounded.
It was Ayami, goddess of fertility, the goddess of youth or childhood, sunlight, and birth. Fur on back, antlers.
From her magnificent count seeped the most intoxicating medley of sensuous fragrances and flavors. The scent of her mother's loving hugs and eager lips before she was taken away on the white man's slave ships. The scent of her first lessons hunting, the pungent odor of her first kiss with Gahiji, a smell of daisies and lively dancing, a
smell of music and melodies and unbridled vitality. Around her one could taste the air, and it tasted like wild strawberries and the lasciviousness of youth. And if one listened intently enough, one could hear through the perfume and poetry of her wet parts the song of children playing and infants weeping. One could hear the sound of the first visions of the gods that set the stars ablaze. The sacred sound, Om, Om, Om. Ayami reached deep into the cavity between her throbbing wet lips in a lustful fingering motion and removed from it a seed of infinite light. A pulsating bead that glowed like it had been dipped in volcano fire or freshly flamed steel from the smith's furnace. Ayami knelt by the astonished monarch, wiped her tears, hoisting her head gently up toward her lips. Ayima embraced her with infinite love, kissed her sensuously on her thick brown lips, which by now was smeared with her own blood from the internal bleeding. Their lips mingled preciously until Aima's lips also became drenched with blood. Halima tasted the metallic tongue of her blood transform into a sweet liquor. She felt herself becoming increasingly drunk and giddy as Aima planted the seed in her belly where the dagger had made the wound. She felt the warmth in her tummy as the gash she had made healed and her belly began to swell, growing more and more plump as the kissing and caressing continued. Before she knew, she began feeling immense feelings of pleasure and connection she had never felt before, an overwhelming pressure building up before until she could no longer stand it, and she fell to the ground moaning and writhing in ecstasy. And just like that, Ayami faded into the night, smiling, happy with her work. Sated and instinctively rubbing her body, trying to linger on the euphoric sensations she was still feeling, as she caressed her breast, making her way down her body, the Zommy was quickly sobered by a stunning revelation. She thought she must be touching another woman's body because her fearsome, muscular physique had been replaced by a portly lump at her tummy. She could feel her inside her kicking. Nzambi, could it be? She ran her fingers ecstatically up and down her drum belly. Tears and laughter all at once. The happiest tears. Her Highness, the High Zommy, was pregnant. And judging by the size of her belly, she concluded she was about 9 moons in. Chapter 6: Funeral of a Jackal Prince. It is worth it now to tell a little of the history of the noble snake riders and their odyssey from wards of the village to the emancipated, self-sufficient warrior community they now were. However, first, we must take a small detour to the solemn day a jaguar prince died. The rains had just come in when Alebansa unhappily received the body of his son. It was a sad day for Chief Alebansa Okan when his favored and eldest son perished in the Battle of Bugi River. It took several of Chief Orimbatsu's finest troops to floor the legendary warrior Prince Kwasi, but finally he met his end, spear in gut and arrow through the eye. Thus the Battle of Bugi River concluded, with the brave leopard skins, otherwise known as the Utah tribe, victorious. Chief Ori had taken no pleasure in discovering the loss of his nephew and immediately made arrangements for the boy's corpse to be delivered to his brother, who was eagerly anticipating word of his son's fate. It was in fact the Yogo soldiers witnessing the sad fall of their mightiest sword that made them lose faith and make a hasty retreat back to the king's compound in Abacha. Seeing their great folk hero fallen, with a bloody tear running down his impaled eye socket, rain pouring on his wounded body as he sank into the blades of grass that covered the battlefield, their king also nowhere to be found, was enough for the Yogos to accept that the gods had not favored their spears that day. The following day the boy's body was delivered back to Abacha, the newly found capital of Alabanza's kingdom, where his royal courts were stationed. Chief Ori sent the body to his brother with condolences, so that he might receive the proper ceremonial funeral of an honored soldier. On seeing her son's dead face, his mother beside herself began wailing and shrieking and embracing his battered body hysterically until the poor woman eventually collapsed from grief. His father, a seasoned warrior, was no less inconsolable. Alabanza, carrying his son's lifeless body to rest in his heart for one last night before his funeral, cried to the ancestors and the gods of the land, swearing revenge on the impostor king. He himself had retreated from the battle after seeing thousands of his soldiers' bodies scattered all over the river bank. The long grass of the savannah spread crimson and gleaming in the sun's bright light. Thanks to the blades of fallen spears that stretched as far as the eye could see, Alabanza hadn't received the body of his son kindly. He pounded the couriers to death in mortar with elephant tusks. He then ordered their pureed viscera to be mixed with bifenitida dye and applied to the funeral dancers as mourning paint. Prior to this, the poor bearers of bad tidings had been subjected to agonizing tortures. Hooks placed through their shoulder blades, armpits, and backs. Innumerable flesh wounds carved into them, after which grounded bell peppers had been applied to the wounds and rubbed deep into their throats, nose, and anus. What was left of their skull and heart were placed on the burning float beside the prince. The mourners gathered under grass-touching canopies. No local dignitaries outside the encampment dared attend the prince's funeral for fear of what Alabanza might demand of them. Quite frankly, they'd be lucky if they made it out alive. So the funeral was mainly attended by warriors who had dignified themselves on the battlefield and been elevated to noblemen by the king, sobers who had turned side during the long drought, believing the gods were punishing them for electing a false king. Then there were the musicians and colorful lady entertainers. The whole event was quite the spectacle. The rain poured hot and splat thick as cooking oils the day of the funeral. The droopy-faced lead calabash player plucked his hunter's harp with such furious tenacity that his smoky eyes seemed alight and his eggy cheeks sweated profusely, compromising his ritual paints. The ivory trumpet player's cheeks puffed up like rhino frogs, while the longer drummer's hands had become blurs from their spirited tattoo. As the queen rode through the forest footpath toward the river bank, on her